Catholicism as Ideology, Mike Lewis and Kennedy Hall, by Thaddeus Kosinski. It seems obvious to me that Jorge Bergoglio is an evil man. You and I can determine this. This is evident by his words, actions, and fruits. His words are at best heretical, if it even rises to that level. He says that practicing non-Christian religions are salvific, qua non-Christian. His actions are evil. He has promoted known sodomites. He has mocked and gaslighted those who refuse to wear the satanic sacramental, the mask, in 2020. And he morally mandated billions of Catholics to inject themselves with a dangerous experimental drug for no good reason. And his fruits are rotten. One word: chaos. Ye shall judge them by their fruits. Jesus says we are allowed to judge people, their character, even their intentions, by their fruits. Whether Bergoglio is the Pope or not is something you and I both can and cannot determine. We can determine it in a sense because he's certainly, at best, a heretic. The evidence of his pattern of words and actions clearly indicates this, and I would say a formal one, although that has to be determined by an official trial, authoritatively and definitively. The evidence also clearly indicates that he was never the Pope, because Benedict XVI never resigned the papacy. So if one just looks with one's eyes and thinks with one's intellect, informed by what is actually the case, as much as one can discover what that is by research and thinking, and relying on the research and thinking of good-willed and faithful Catholics more informed and educated than oneself, one can see that the evidence indicates that there has been no Pope of the Catholic Church since Benedict XVI's death in 2022. You and I cannot determine this, of course, in the official sense, because we are not the Church, and only the Church can officially declare a seat vacant and a Pope an anti-Pope. But in the meantime, since human reason itself seems beyond a reasonable doubt, at least, to lead to the conclusion that Bergoglio is maliciously evil and not the Pope, and since we are morally obliged to obey reason, we are permitted to judge that he is evil and not the Pope, and even make this judgment public. Mark Mallet, for example, disagrees with this, and he has tried in private correspondence to make me feel guilty and evil for judging the Pope, as he calls it. But his arguments are quite fallacious, tendentious, and based more upon fear than reason, it seems to me. But Ed Mazza, Dr. Mazza, agrees with me, or rather I agree with him, for he's the better scholar on this question, perhaps the best there is right now. Just about all, perhaps all, who think more or less the way I do about Bergoglio, at least that he's really bad news, a very bad pope, perhaps the worst of them all, these are self-styled traditionalists. And they also tend to agree with my condemnation of the status quo normie Catholicism of your typical suburban parish, which really sucks, as well as my view of the official narratives of, say, secular liberalism, World War II, 9/11, and the scamdemic, all of which I judge to be ideological psyops, lies. But I'm not a traditionalist. In fact, I despise traditionalism as I do all ideologies. Conversely, about all, perhaps all, who criticize traditionalism, but for the wrong reasons, because they hate tradition itself, tend to defend heretic Bergoglio and the stupid normie Catholicism, They parrot and defend all the official narratives and consider just about every one of my judgments to be anti-Semitic or a conspiracy theory. So I earnestly ask, is there anyone out there who despises both the look at my beard and my big family Pharisee Catholicism of, say, Kennedy Hall, and the look at my anti-Semitism, kneel to the world nauseating Catholicism of, say, Mike Lewis? Perhaps there are some 1958 sedevacantists who do, but the price they have paid for this is a pathological inner circle pride and downright insanity, not to mention the mortal sin of schism. These hate people like Kennedy Hall because they're not insane or schismatic enough. And then there's the Benedict XVI Communio Balthasar Catholic World Report academically inclined Catholics, such as Larry Chapp, who do disdain both traditionalism and progressivism for the right reasons, but they also hate and they slander relentlessly Catholics like E. Michael Jones and Candace Owens. And it's precisely because of the truths they tell and the names they name that they do so. Truths and names that they are either too cowardly to tell and name or just too brainwashed, or they just find it somehow helpful to their career and prestige to slander those whose independence from the Catholic establishment, and perhaps from financial necessities, allows them the freedom to speak truth to power. And they do tell the truth, most of the time at least, and they try to, and they definitely ask forbidden questions. Questions about deep state events and psyops and the infiltration and corruption of the human element of the church by ideology, particularly the ideology of anti Semitism, which has nothing to do with its real meaning, race based hatred, and the unjust treatment of Jewish people, but all to do with its ever changing definition by, say, the Anti Defamation League, with a common core definition of being whatever those in power, who happen to be those in power who happen to be both criminal and Jewish, whatever they consider a threat to their power. Such truth telling, even though in accordance with all actual Catholic teaching and practice, and based upon at worst eminently debatable claims and facts, and best evidently true claims and facts, is a priori declared by these overeducated academic Catholic types to be conspiracy theory or insane or, of course, anti Semitic. It's incredible how smart and informed they are on some topics, and I've learned much from them, those more abstract and theological, but so stupid and brainwashed on others, those where the theological rubber meets the geopolitical road. Nevertheless, E. Michael Jones sees nothing good in devotion to the Latin Mass. He defends Bergoglio as much as somebody like Mike Lewis, and he will not tolerate even the possibility of 2022 sedevacantism. So all of these camps are either tainted with it, more or less, or fully possessed by some kind of ideology. And to the extent that they are, they're out of reality in some way, and so are anti Catholic, and will, if the ideology is embraced knowingly and unrepentantly, lead their adherents to hell. Extreme progressivism and radical traditionalism are fully possessed by these ideologies, and they seem antithetical, but since they are both thoroughly ideological, they're more similar than different. Two sides of the same coin, mirror images of one another, reactionary codependent doubles. They are like the opposite vices in Aristotle's virtue scheme, which have more in common than the virtue against which they find their identity. Rashness and cowardice seem completely opposite, but they're more similar to each other than courage. The extreme progressivists and traditionalists hate each other immensely, for neither of them is Catholic at all. As for the less ideological and thus still sane and Catholic, for now at least, for some a little ideology tends to spoil and metastasize. The conspiratorialist Catholics, who tend to lean traditionalist, are despised or ignored by the professional academic Catholics, who also tend to lean traditional, or at least non progressive, even though their philosophical and theological and cultural truth telling and ideological unmasking should make them friends and fellow soldiers in the culture war with both the traditionalists and the conspiratorialists. And they should reach the same conclusions as the conspiratorialists regarding deep state narratives, but they don't. And the professorial academic Catholics, whose philosophical and theological sophistication and depth would greatly enhance and complement the research of the conspiratorialists, who tend not to be academically pedigreed, they are looked at suspicion, are ignored by the conspiratorialists. The extreme where Peter is progressives and the 1958 Sede traditionalists hate all of these groups, the conspiratorial, professorial, and normie traditionalist Catholics, lumping them all together as one evil brood because they don't gush about modernity and the synod and hate Trump and the pro-life movement enough on the one hand, the progressivists, or on the other, the traditionalists in the radical sense, because they don't think that Benedict XVI, John Paul II, and St. Faustina were all devils incarnate. What was the Pharisees' paradigm? It was ideological, and it made them hate and desire to destroy Jesus and persecute his followers. We are the God appointed leaders of the Jews, are we not? Our paradigm is the very revelation of God, for we are and must be the epitome of loyalty, piety, courage, and devotion to God. Well, yes, it was supposed to be at least, and they were, but only if Jesus was only a human being. If he was God, then their virtues become vices with this attitude. And the Jews, as St. John calls those Hebrews who rejected Jesus incarnate, become not God's bride, but the devil's prostitute, not the church of Yahweh, but the synagogue of Satan. Saul was a prisoner to such an ideological paradigm, and nothing but an unforeseen, undesired, indeed violent encounter with who, to his diseased spirit and intellect, was the radically other, a Jewish man claiming to be God, could liberate him. If Saul had been allowed to remain in the isolated, blinded paradigm of the Jewishdom of his day, the way in which some traditionalist Catholics would like to remain in the isolating Christendoms of their neuroses, fears, and Gnostic certainties, his blindness would never have been revealed to him, and he would never have become St. Paul, the apostle to the Jewish other, the Gentile. Christ himself had to break Saul out of his ideological paradigm, which was indeed not one of authentic Mosaic Judaism, but a rabbinical proto-Talmudic fanaticism of purely human and diabolical origin. This had to occur violently against his will, but we have the chance to invite Christ freely into our minds and hearts by inviting those salvific others, ones that we would rather not meet, into our intimacy, as they are providentially forced upon us by our Lord and his providence in our modern pluralistic world, as neighbors, or even as bedridden, illiterate 19th century nobodies through which Jesus has given the world the greatest grace since the incarnation, the greatest grace of living in the divine will. Louisa Piccarreta, who the traditionalist Father James Maudsley has recently disgustingly slandered. We need this gift of living in the divine will because as the Antichrist approaches, prepared for by the apotheosis of his great reset, worldly minions, of which we have had a foretaste in the totalitarian scandemic, which is on pause for now, but perhaps about to replay at a much higher speed and volume, he will rule over and exploit and annihilate all our paltry paradigms. We will all be in the position of the apostles when the truth incarnate asks them each personally, "Who do you say that I am?" At that moment, no paradigm will do, no out of context proof texting and quote mining to prove your judgment true will suffice, and no tribal in house ideology, no matter how traditional, will help you. Listen up, Kennedy Hall. Shave your beard and go to the Novus Ordo. That's a first step to saving your soul from hell. Let us all prepare ourselves now for that moment by destroying our idols and revolutionizing our paradigms. With the knowledge that when it all comes down, we are all personally responsible for recognizing, loving, and obeying the truth. And although we are tradition constituted rational animals who could only make rational judgments within and by the help of an inherited and chosen paradigm of thought, we are required and enabled, ultimately, to transcend these paradigms when necessary by God Himself, who wants to know whom we really love at the core of our hearts, which is a place beyond any intellectual paradigm, however traditional, where God and reality meet us intimately and immediately. Let us prepare for this meeting, for it is coming soon.